Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to Improving's Lunch and Learn. I'm Jeff Sheets, Vice President of Technology at Improving, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we get started, I want to inform you about the Q&A feature. There's a question mark icon at the upper right of the presentation screen. Clicking that icon will open the question and answer feature, which allows you to send in questions, and we'll deliver those to the speakers at the appropriate time. And now, excited to introduce Devlin Miles. He's our Chief Consulting Officer at Improving, and David Belcher, our VP of Consulting and User Experience. Together, they'll be presenting the business case for UX to us here today. Thank you, Devlin and David, and the floor is now yours.
Great, thanks. I appreciate it, Jeff. Thanks. And David, thanks for taking some time to have a conversation with us. Give everybody a little bit of an introduction on what this is. So we started a couple of months ago doing these conversations where we deconstruct conversations that are typically had behind closed doors. These are typically conversations improvers will have over a happy hour or over a ping pong table, and really tearing apart the reasons we make decisions. It was like, what if we had those same conversations, but put a video camera and a microphone in the room? And so that's the intent of this conversation. It's not about the traditional conversation. And so we're going to be tearing down a lot of the jargon and acronyms. We're going to try and have David call me out if I use an acronym or a piece of jargon. I'm going to call him out in the same way. But the scenario we're going to dive into is a real one. We are, internal to Improving, replacing a lot of our CRUD systems. And we're rewriting them into kind of a single operational portal for people to use for internal rewards, career growth, training, community engagement, resume management, all these things. The initial MVP is roughly ready, but there's been a lot of recommendations for a UX kind of design approach for the go live and the iterations of how we integrate these tools, because the back end piece is ready, but the front end could use some work. And so with that context around the conversation, we're going to kind of dive in. So going kind of straight into it, David, I hear UX, UI, design thinking, like all these terms getting thrown around almost interchangeably. Yeah. Are they actually different?
Yeah, essentially they are. And, just kind of a bit of a quick history that I think, if you talk about design, that's the way I like to think of a lot of things. There's a lot of aspects to design when it comes to UX, UI, and design thinking itself. And so if you really want to kind of give you some quick high level overview of what way I'd kind of define it, and the way that I would kind of separate this, because this is a challenge. A lot of people think, hey, we're going to bring in someone to do some design. And so now you're going to wash it with colors and make it pretty and do some things like that. And I think that's, a little bit of a misunderstanding. It is, yes, one of the things we can do, but let's kind of look at it from the perspective of, if you think about UX or user experience, that is the total interaction a user has with the product. And so it doesn't speak to the colors itself, but it's really, what is the overall approach to things? And so, if I have a product that requires a certain task to be accomplished, the visual design could help with that. But if you're really thinking about, how many steps does it take? What are the needed interactions that need to occur? What are the things that the user has to understand and know as they proceed through that? If it's difficult, that could make the product a little bit not as good as one that has maybe a more simplified approach. So the experience looks at that total interaction and makes sure, are the users able to accomplish what it is they're trying to do? And so when we think about UX, we are really thinking about the user specifically. We're trying to empathize and understand the user. And that's where you'll get into areas like user research. And so there's like a little bit of a subset of the UX side of things. And so you can do research, UX design, usability testing, and things like that. Now, if we want to talk about UI or user interface, so that's the UI side of things. We're going to be specifically looking at the screens and the visual design and its elements. So what are the buttons? What do the buttons look like? What type of icons, inputs, other components that make up the interaction and the content of the screen. And then we also talk about, so that's what they're interacting with as a user, but that's going to give you the specific aesthetic or a brand. It's going to reflect the brand of the organization building building the product. And definitely you want some consistency across the screens itself. So the visual design can help with the UX, but it's I think kind of starting off with like what color should the button be before you ever really understand what the user needs are or how you should build the experience really does kind of put things in the wrong order in my mind. So the other thing you hear a lot is design thinking, and it's design thinking itself is really more of a process that kind of helps with designing products. So it does involve both the UX and the UI side of things. Design thinking is, you can kind of approach it in several different ways, but design thinking is something that could be done as simply in a, we have all sorts of ways we could approach it. Design thinking could be done in a 5-minute conversation. It could be done in a week-long workshop, or it could be done across the full life cycle of a product itself. And so it's just a matter of like, how do you want to approach things? And so the idea is really design thinking is, understanding the users, what their challenges are, find ways to, find innovative solutions, and then prototype and test it. And, in some ways you think about it. And so like design thinking allows you to understand problems that you're trying to solve. And then, by understanding the problem first, looking at the solutions, and then building out that solution, and then understanding, did this actually solve anything? And if not, in a more iterative fashion, because design thinking is pretty iterative, is you can say, we failed, let's go back to the drawing board, or this worked mostly, but some tweaks or suggestions should be made, or this is good, let's go build it. And so I like the idea. That's a good way to reflect that doing design can inform you before making some big, heavy, expensive decisions into the development side of things.
Okay, so digging in on that, I'm going to use the term design effort to kind of jump all of the nuance that you just talked about, because I think we're really talking about the whole thing.
Yes.
So before this talk, I reached out to several friends, CEOs that run companies enabled by tech, all the way to, right, they're a software product company. And the opinion of design efforts was either frivolous waste or amorphous magic wand I wave over my product because I have to.
Mm-hmm.
None of them had a good measure of success. So how do I measure as a business person the success of a design effort?
Yeah. I think one of the ways, there's several, but I think the best way, in my opinion, is consistent engagement with your users and other stakeholders, right? And so if you have a product out there that was, intended to, drive new revenues, or you have a new product offering that this company has built, and they have, designs of making money with it, I think it would be really important to be consistently engaged with your users, because if you did this all up front and you say, hey, I think we got a good understanding of what the users need, and they're going to really, really love this product, and like, wow, what a great hit it's been. But user needs change, marketplaces change, and things like that. And so if you kind of do it once, you can measure what it initially may have did to help you launch that product. But if you all of a sudden see like a dip and you don't go back and look at, what was it that's changed? Has there been a new thing that the users now need, or is there something changed out there that they've found a better product perhaps, and things like that. And so I think if you could kind of really tap into the reason why you might have built the product in the first place, if the users don't need what you've built, then you don't really have a reason to keep that product around a lot, because it might not make money and things like that. And so, yes, you can measure with like analytics and things like that. But I think at the end of the day, if you look at data from like the quantitative side of things, there's always going to be a story of what that data is telling you. And so if you say, hey, why does it not work at this point of a certain, process, or a certain step of a process, go ask a user, like, what happens here? It's like, oh yeah, you no longer take American Express. or something like that for payment. And it's like, and then you go, well, how many transactions we do at American Express? Like, oh, we stopped taking American Express, but 80% of our users were using that card. Like, I think you might know that from the data side, but you could validate it with talking to the user. So just kind of on the spot example, maybe not the best one, but yeah.
So, all right. So there's a cost to bad design, I think, is what you're alluding to with the like, hey, your users are trying to do something and you took that away from them or didn't build it. I'm a data person. Like, I believe that success and failure is partially determined by the status of the P&L. Like, what's the cost of bad design? Like, what are the benefits? Where am I going to see good design is going to show up as increased revenue or something? Like, bad design is going to cost me here. What is that?
Yeah, and I always kind of frame it around like a well-known quote, among designers, but it's definitely made it out into the world, I guess you can say, of product and software and technology. But like, if you think good design is expensive, you should look at the cost of bad design. We have the upside of good design. It's pretty well known. Like, you grow your business, you gain market share, and could even become industry leader over competition and things like that. And I think that if you talk about the cost of bad design, is thinking like, well, if we didn't do any design, we didn't have to pay for design. But in my mind, that still means you've done no design, or would maybe result in bad design, because everything you do has some sort of design to it, whether it's you pay a lot of attention to it, some attention to it, or don't really implement anything at all. And so, if we want to talk a couple of different ways to think about it, that like, if you have bad design and you rely on users to generate revenues of some ways or whatnot, that if it's not good design, you might start to see, frustrating and losing your users, and that would decrease revenues. If you're offering some sort of service or product that they're able to do, in your mind, self-service, it's all something that could be done using technology and doesn't involve like any sort of humans. Like, and all of a sudden you see an increase in call center volume, because people are making calls like, hey, I didn't buy this, like, or I bought too many of these and I can't figure out a way to remove it, things like that. So it's like your costs and the cost of that bad design, you didn't have to pay for it up front, but you might start finding it in like lost revenue, loss of users, increase in costs in other areas. And that's kind of more of like an external product. But if you're talking about a design of an internal system, like lots of companies build software for their employees to use so they can do their jobs. What's the cost of lower productivity, increased errors, low morale amongst your employees? Like, if you give them a tool and they think it sucks, like, and that's their daily job, how do they feel about working for you if this is what you give them, right? It's like giving them the chair with the squeaky wheel, and you'll refuse to replace it for them, I guess. So it's a tool that they need to do, and they have to find some sort of joy in that to make that their job. So
okay, so kind of riffing on that for a minute. So you mentioned a few different things in that, and almost all of them were central around feedback systems. So is design synonymous with adjusting to user feedback? It sounds very much like lean startup, vicious validation testing cycles. Like, so do I need design, or is it just something I do all the time and I'm responding to feedback and just whack-a-mole with the biggest complaint of the day?
Yeah, I think having some process and intent around how you would like to enlist your users could kind of, I'm preaching for consistency. Like, get to know your users, talk to them about, how they currently use or do what it is they do. And if you're trying to solve their problem by building a piece of software for it, like, I think it informs your approach up front, but it also can inform how to make improvements. And so you could have a relatively great design, but then there still might be an existing pain point in there that could be tuned into. Sometimes it could be, oh my gosh, we didn't realize it could be a bug in the software. And sometimes it could be a conversation that doesn't happen, or an email that's not sent, or things like that. And so I think it's really kind of more, if you think about like, does it fix the whole system, or does it give you some opportunities for, maybe the little tweaks and adjustments that just keep on, like more of like a maintenance type of approach of things. And so to me, so it's building but maintaining. And I think users even have the ability to kind of tell you when they no longer need what it is you're offering. And like if you have like a some sort of service that all of a sudden it's offered on their phone or something, there's an easier way to do it, then maybe they don't need the fax feature anymore or something like that. So, and then you don't need to support that feature anymore. And so good design is sometimes simplifying your product. Instead of keep bolting on new features, sometimes it's simplifying and knowing which ones to hack, unfortunately. So
that makes sense. So being a kind of an internal maximizer of wanting the best value for the lowest cost, like any of the business people I know, what's like the low cost, high impact way to approach UX if I can't afford the UI design and the design thinking and the user research? Like, where do I start if I don't want to spin up an entire UX practice?
Yeah. I mean, we always like to be included on all the good projects and all the fun things. And if there is a user involved, chances are one of the best chances of success is to work and understand your users. And we don't hold the monopoly on being able to talk to users and understand their challenges. And so I think when we talk about movements in product, like if we talk about, we're building products, we're not building software anymore. So product is kind of talking about building something that has that value and that vision, and a way that you can validate whether you should be building things. And I think technology teams should embrace approaches like that. And so if you didn't have UX on a project, but you had strong project management, product ownership, QA, tech leads, Scrum masters, I think anyone could still go out and talk to a user. And to me, if you're talking about the affordability of it, the cost of conducting a user interview or a usability test or doing some job shadowing might only cost time. I think the most expensive usability test we may have done is offered like $5 gift cards for a user to sit on and test a prototype for 15-20 minutes. And so it really is, if you can make the time, I think the rest of it is like a little bit of planning, it's an affordable thing. And there's, like I said, we could, as designers, we could teach, we kind of show how we apply our craft. And it doesn't mean that like we want to not be participants, because I think there's other things that we have expertise in, but understanding the users and taking it from that approach, at least informs you we can do this, or wow, we actually do need some help. And then now you can talk about the last thing we're talking about, the cost of good design versus the very, very big cost of bad design. So
makes sense. I am going to pull in a couple of questions from kind of the folks that are attending, because there's some really good ones here before we kind of continue down the path you and I had talked about. One of them is entrepreneurial leadership requires going beyond responding to just user requests, right? Having like a transformative product evolution, having a vision for that future and then really creating it. But how do we build the culture that leads to revolutionary design rather than kind of user request and response being evolutionary design?
Yeah. No, and that's like a nice, great question. I appreciate that being asked, actually, because if you think about, going back to another quote that I can't, speak to who actually said it originally, but the idea, most likely Henry Ford, but the idea is like, if I built what people wanted, I would have built them a better buggy and not the car. And so innovation, the car happened, right? And things like that. And so I think it really is, there's some merit to, still kind of understanding the user, understanding, what's currently out there with other products, what's not there, what technology is available. And so I think it really does, allude to other components that I believe make up innovation. And I think about, there's like kind of three dependencies that I think someone could, maybe, best the current norm, like the Ubers out there or the Netflixes, back in the day, or the Airbnbs, of like kind of looking at is there a technological, is it available? Is there something that allows us to do something with technology? Is it something that it has a business, a business viability to it, so it's technically feasible? And then finding out that if you could do this, and then lastly trying to understand, are there going to be customers or users that are going to have it, it's going to be desirable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they might not even know the challenges that you're solving for them, or they don't question the way that they do things today. And I think that's where innovation occurs. And so it becomes desirable on top of maybe the challenges that they're solving for them. So I think, some things are make accounting software better, and then some things are wow, my dishes are unloaded from the dishwasher. I'll take that product.
To add to that, one of the things that I often think about is that the construction process for houses really
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally at its basics hasn't changed in 75, 80 years. But that didn't stop Frank Lloyd Wright from kind of flipping on its head the design aesthetic and changing things,
Mm-hmm.
and giving people something they didn't know they wanted until they saw it. And then they wanted a lot of it. And so I look at revolutionary design is similar in its evolution to evolutionary
Mm-hmm.
design, because after the idea is had, then it's evolving that design to what the customer wants,
Mm-hmm.
evolving it to being business viable and those kind of things. That evolution is expensive, right? When you talk about
Mm-hmm.
revolutionary design, it's whether it's pharmaceuticals bringing a new drug to market might cost them $800 million. The second, dose of that thing costs 4 cents. The first one cost $800 million.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get into this idea creation and then vicious market testing.
Mm-hmm.
The best summary I ever heard of it was, I want the distance between idea to market rejection to be as fast as possible. I want it to be as short as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so the ones that we get to the end and the market didn't reject become our products. And then we have to continually make sure the market's not slowly rejecting them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love it because, that's where I believe design and the way that we'd approach design, it's quick, it's iterative, and you have to allow yourself to fail and know when to shut some things down. And so, when you talk about the quickest route to failure, if it went through the 2 years of a development team building something, and then you find out it's going to fail on the other end, that's a pretty bad way to get to that point, right? And so, there are things that you would maybe want to be from the more lean side of things, and I think that's where I think design does kind of help, answer those questions of hey, I think I got something innovative. No one's really asking for this type of thing. That's the idea, that if you're so guarded on no one can know about it yet, is the ones where it might just take too long to get it out there to find out if it's really a good idea or not. And so I think those are the ones where you really want to make sure that, hey, if we're going to do a big major company pivot, we're going to do things a certain way going forward. Would you want to go 100% that way, or would you maybe want to even try maybe taking a little proportion of your business and running an experiment, and then understanding how close were we to being able to change the world, versus no, let's go back to the drawing board on this, kind of taking that
Makes
Amazon
sense.
approach. Amazon in this conversation probably tested thousands of things in and out of production as we speak.
So I'm glad you used that example, because I'm not Amazon. I mean, 99.9996% of all companies are never going to be Amazon. They're not going to have billions of users. They're not going to have tens of thousands of developers. And they probably don't need to run thousands of experiments a day on design to run their paper manufacturing or their trash reclaiming or their recycling process. So when we think about design, like, what's the appropriate amount? Because like I don't need Google level design, I don't think.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it would be, there's always the kind of depends on what you're kind of working through. But I think, you can look at things that you don't think perform very well, or you've got initial maybe feedback, or there's even evidence in the numbers of there's just something not right at some point in your product, and the right amount of design doesn't necessarily mean crap, we got to redesign the whole thing, right? Like, what if it's just, hey, maybe it's this aspect of a screen, and let's, like, how necessary is it? Like, challenge the solution you've got. Can you remove it? Can you maybe do some adjustments, at a level that, should it be something like, yes, we shouldn't do the improvement. It would be, a feature to be developed in a future iteration, or, to be launched, as soon as possible. But it doesn't require having to, like, tear down the whole system around it, or whatnot, or maybe even build like a whole, end-to-end prototype. It really could be, hey, we got this idea, team got together, we think we've identified what it is we need, and we drew a picture of it. Like, could you take that to a potential user or customer and say, if we did it this way, and you could pretend heavily that this is part of the actual working system, what do you think? And you could listen to what the user says, and then you probably want to make sure you do that at least, 4 or 5 more times to get a nice, ban the outlier situation or whatnot. But if you get a little bit of a consensus there, then we're talking about what, 5 or 6 15, 20-minute conversations to fix those things. So, and it's
Makes
like
sense.
That could be the right amount of design for that little broken section of a product that does really well.
So I want to pivot to one of the other questions here. So people often think of design as what wise people do up front. Should we? And if so, how do we shift the culture of an organization towards, like, continuous design? Like, is it stuff you do up front? Is it all the time? Is it a mixture? Like, what's the shift?
Yeah, I think, if you, I just saw a great graphic this morning. I wish I could describe what it was, but it's like the continuous improvement thing, right? That it's like I don't know, do you have to put everything on hold for perfection, or could you find ways to, like turning the switch to change the culture of a whole company, to do it all up front versus, allowing it a little bit to seep into the process. So what's and I'm speaking about this fictitious company that naturally has things in production and products that are, dependently crucial to business success and viability, and then there's other ideas that they're trying to build, right? They're trying to do something innovative, right? And so, if you're trying to be really innovative and you're not using design, potentially that's not the right approach. But like looking at your current product and not necessarily changing it so much that from an uninformed position, I think is, ways that you try to find ways to incorporate it. And the way that I like to think about it is it's very collaborative. It doesn't like bring in, people pointing sticks at people saying how wrong they've done things, but it's kind of more of like, can I partner up and understand, like, how did we get to this here? And that's kind of like, as a consultant, I love doing that. I get really careful about, I've seen some pretty scrappy looking products, and you got to be really careful about what maybe your true feelings are, but you'd be a little bit more judicious about, can we talk about how we got here, right? And
don't want to call somebody's babies ugly.
Yeah. I wanted you to say that, not me.
So it sounds like you're advocating for very much like a James Clear Atomic Habits kind of 1% better approach. Like you do have to be intentional and do some thinking up front, but you can incrementally do that design. Even if you're not a designer, you could seek feedback throughout the process and make it better and maybe increment upward. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I love the idea.
Okay.
There was like an article about exposure hours or exposure time. So if you took a development team or a product team and you gave them consistent, like every 6 weeks, every 3 months, if you put your development team in front of the users that they build a product or a piece of software for, and just talk to them. Doesn't have to be a formalized user test. It could just be like, hey, how's it going? What challenges? Like that is something that could be a very small thing that would be the 1% change in that product. Having the exposure and understanding about the user, they can now empathize with their pain and things like that. So some of this stuff actually is a little bit of like the human condition coming in and the relationships you build, and be like, man, I really do want to build something better for them. Like, is that what you would feel like when you come out of a conversation, and then 6 weeks later, what else happens?
Makes sense. So we've got another question, and I'm going to read it and then I'm going to kind of answer it. So people conflate design to only the visual, when design is the brand, the functionality, the checkout process, the tone, the language. They should all be designed. The question is how to have those conversations with the C-level to share that insight. And so I'm gonna posit a set of response kind of guidelines to that conversation, and then I'm gonna have you kind of shoot them up, David, and go, how's that work for you? Because what I find is, if I go to an oncologist, they're looking for cancer, right? If I go to a dermatologist, they're only looking at my skin. It's a lot like that when I have conversations. When I talk to a technologist, every solution should be technology. When I talk to a designer, everything should be designed. I talk to an agile coach, everything should be agile. And I've never found that there are that many unnuanced, absolutely all the time decisions in business. I think it's a balance of nuance and trade-offs. And so one of my pieces of advice would be listen a lot in having that conversation and soften the language, right? If it is about making the business better, making us more profitable, bringing in more revenue, increasing retention of employees, then you're going to get a lot more openness to considering new ideas. But if it is, my team should be more important, it sounds self-serving and gets dismissed as self-serving, even if it's right. And so there's a lot of listening and focusing on the outcomes you're trying to create, not the process you're going to use to create them. Because to be frank, most of the time, I don't actually care about the process to get created. As long as I agree about the outcomes, I trust the team to know the right process. What do you think, David?
Wow, that's awesome. And you said the last couple things. There's like not listening to respond, but listening to kind of contribute to what you were saying, of course. And I think you talk about the outcomes, right? And I think you've identified groups of people that do sit at that C level, the CTO, the people that are the product and things like that. And then you're like, well, what about the CEO? Well, he already has the title of CEO, not the chief experience officer. So like sometimes I think design maybe claim we don't have the seat at that table. And I hope I'm going in the right direction on this one, but I want to say this anyways. But the idea is like I think we're always talking about like, these products are being decided because there's like, hey, business could make a ton of money if we do this. And now what technology should we use? And then it's like, even in the example, like, so now we're kind of close to it being done, and crap, what about design? We forgot to ask them. They weren't sitting in the table and things like that. And I think if I look at what is my challenge at the level I'm at, maybe not the current position that I'm doing, but if I think about it in terms of doing the good design work at the project level, working collaboratively with the development teams. But I think like the future, the way that I like to think about it is like, how do I bring design into the thought of outcomes, right? Like is it runs parallel with like a company's 5-year vision about where they want to take their product line. And then like, could we actually look at a UX or a design outcome that runs in parallel with that, that says, you know, if this is the way that you think you're going to grow your business, you know, is it the product, do you think the product works like it does today, you know, 2 years from now, 5 years from now? It's like, how do we help you find, you know, the car instead of the buggy whip, you know, going to a certain state that you can envision the future. Like we say, hey, in 50 years we want to be able to do this. It's like, you know, we could miss the boat, you know, after 8 years, technically, the way that technology could just come out of nowhere and we're like, wow, we're doing everything differently. But I think outcome and being able to help work with the other constituents that help build products like that, and then, you know, getting that vision and having those conversations with it. So when we get the seat at the table, we can't screw up too quickly. We just got to need to understand what are the goals that those people have, and then how do we help them see that outcome with design being part of it.
Yeah, I love the fact that you've talked about the buggy, you've talked about Ford, and I agree with you. Interestingly enough, from one lens, it was revolutionary, right? It wasn't a horse and buggy. It was entirely different. But from another lens, it had identical outcomes. It got people and goods from point A to point B. That was it. And it was less cost of maintenance, et cetera, than a horse. Like, and so when you look at it from that broader outcome lens, a lot of the revolution in our world starts to look a lot less revolutionary, right?
Yeah.
If you look at BP said, we're going to be carbon zero by 2050. And that sounds incredible if you look at them as a oil and gas company. But if you look at them as an energy company and the investments in biofuels and solar and hydroelectric and all these other places they're putting investment dollars, it's like, oh, they're not getting out of the energy business. They're just changing the energy they provide. It looks a lot less revolutionary, which, interesting enough, leads us to this next question. Could we say that the measurement of UX typically is implied as analysis post-delivery, right? Like what outcomes, user feedback, all that. How do we extend that as like a must-have earlier in the process rather than a bolt-on, right?
Yeah.
And then following that, while designing, can we measure the validity through testing and research, et cetera? Because it seems to be the line item that's almost always eliminated first. And I pose this to you because you're heavily involved in a lot of our sales conversations in which the design aspect is one of those things that gets heavily questioned or removed.
No, exactly. And I want to be pretty clear. Like when we talked about design thinking is like, it's maybe I'm not the best at this because human nature always kind of takes the better of everyone when we do design thinking workshops and stuff like that. It's like the first thing we want to do is understand. And you know how many times in a conversation we're like, okay, so if we go at, like the best scenario is we've gone out, we visited with the users, you know, where we've met them where they work, like we've tried to walk them on their shoe. We've done that. Like, hey, they work in a hospital. They do things in a like an operation, like an OR or something like that. Like, can we actually like witness what they're doing right where they work and right where they actually have the need and the challenges, right? And so, you know, like I said, so like we're understanding the users right where they're at. We're like trying to understand by empathizing with them, and then we're also trying to like kind of frame and understand and define what their problem is. And I said where the human nature always comes in is like we get to this. We're still in this understand phase. There's no formal room that we sit in and then we move over to something else. But like human nature always goes, hey, I think I got an idea for what we can do to solve this, right? So we're always like moving towards the solution. I think humans love to find, I think I know what the problem is. Now here's the solution, right? And then, you know, and then you fail when it doesn't work in times of things like that. But like, I think if you could make sure that you spend the time to understand, be ready to try a solution, you know, even very, very scrappy approaches to things, but then putting that test in and seeing how does that work well before it goes live and into production or becomes a bigger part of a bigger release and things like that. I think, yes, I would always encourage test and validate the quickest cycle possible. That doesn't even have to be so formal as like, now we have to set up a usability test and all that stuff. It's like, I could come up with an idea and I could test it with you and Devlin. You could say, I don't think it's a good idea. And if there's some valid reasons why we shouldn't go further, cool, we killed it at that point. And I know sometimes you have to maybe let things get out into production first, but then that's the opportunity. That's the next best time you should be maybe looking to get things validated with your users, because it isn't, you have your whole scope of your user base working on something that you've just previously released or whatnot, but then you now should ask them to validate it at that point, right? Because that there could be some quick pain that requires some quick solutions to be bolted on after that. So
makes sense. And the second half of the question, like the easy to cut, like first thing to go, like how do you overcome that?
I think that's the biggest thing. And if we talk about it, something we kind of touched on a little bit earlier was the idea of like, it's not just something you do and then it just has this perpetual presence, and it's on autopilot, and no one is actually doing that anymore. Like as a designer and consultant, I don't always stay on projects till the end. It's I kind of go away, and I think my last days with the development team, as I kind of move on to my next challenge, is I hope I've taught you something, or I hope we've collaborated in the right way that you can kind of take some of this on, that you feel comfortable enough to think about some of these things. And so to me, what I look at it is like, it can go away if it's not done. And so like, you have to challenge yourself to try something new and then try to find ways to incorporate doing some of that activity going forward. If you found value in it, make it part of your habits.
And I will say, I mean, looking at costs of systems and looking at building teams, a couple of things make something really easy to go, we don't need that. If it's amorphous, if it doesn't have a clear value add, if I can reasonably assume that what we're going to do is good enough, and if I can assume somebody else is going to cover it, like, well, my product owner is going to talk to the users, I don't need a designer. Well, my devs are going to build good software, so we don't need as many QA. Like, those are the justifications that go to trying to hit a budget. And that's why those things get cut. And then if I don't have a confident plan that there's going to be any difference, right? Like, one of my favorite things is, as a consultant, the answer is always, it depends, right? We may take a lot of words to say it. I've used a lot of words, David's used a lot of words, but it depends could be the headline of this talk. But ultimately, even though there's complexity and there's nuance and there's things that shift, do we have a plan to, like you said, build to self-sufficiency? So it's like, you don't need me for the whole time. We're going to come in, we're going to help do it. We're going to be in the weeds with you. But then we're going to shift to having your team be able to do it, because the tools and templates and structure will be built, right? It's a lot easier to live and maintain in a house than it is to build a house.
That's right.
And so kind of as we continue on our conversation, how does design impact the traditional approach to software development? Let's say I'm sold and I go, I think design is valuable. You've sold me on it. What do I need to do different tomorrow that I'm not doing today?
Yeah. And I think, as I'm kind of thinking through, like, there's some things that approaches today that I really, really enjoy seeing. And I think, I've said this for years, and it feels like I might be the only one that might say it, but there's approaches that kind of reflect the way that I say it. I believe that, like, the use of component libraries and frameworks and design systems are in some ways that, like, that's what a designer can offer to a development team. I think they could be built in concert. I think the less front end dev work that I do these days, and I could pair up with someone that can help me build that side of a design system, a UI, like a component library that allows me to say, hey, I think mostly, and I'm talking software here. I mean, I know we can talk about other ways that we might approach design and product and things like that. But if we're building something that, for the most part, there's a set of components that you need to use in your product a lot. And so like, let's make those as reusable as possible. And so when we have a good feeling that if they're put together with a little bit of, guidance of like, hey, you know what, I showed you how to position a button consistently on the bottom of the page, and I don't put 10 buttons, in a row across it. Like don't do that type of thing. I believe, something like using a design system gives, technology teams, 85 to 90% of all the interactions they might need to build, given what we know about the product at that point. And so I think there is these moments where I could with high confidence know that there's no anxiety, and we don't know what we're building. We don't know how to build it. And it's like, wait a minute, you actually kind of have the pieces, available elsewhere in the application. Could you take that on? And when you can't, that's the 10% of the time that you might want to think a little bit harder, maybe go and do a little bit more intentional design as a team, or be like, hey, this is so crucial. If we don't get this right, this is going to be really impactful for the way that this product's going to be successful or not. Then you could bring us back in. We could help you out, because that's the way we also like to think about things, is we could help do those quick, those quick design thinking workshops that are like, you have a really big problem, you don't have an obvious solution for it, and we don't know what we're supposed to do. Like, okay, we'll help you. We'll help you get your mind tuned into how to approach that. We'll test it and we'll let you know what you think. So that's the way that it could be the occasional. You just got to know when you need to kind of turn the designer knob up, or when you should just always keep a little bit humming in the background, I guess. So.
I like that. I mean, I know you were talking about technology and you were talking about building software products, but what I was hearing is something that could be applied to new market segments, new product offerings of, yeah, if I've got a system by which all right, so here's how we're going to apply it. We're going to identify a market need, right? Total addressable market. We're going to identify something that service can, overlap, so that we've got some shared services. And like, if we built a service design framework or toolkit, or a product design framework or toolkit, it'd be very, very similar in its approach. And unless that new service that we were offering was just way out in the weeds, we could likely cover it without needing to redo all that design work.
Yes. Okay. And that's amazing the way you say it, because that's where you said service design, and like that's where some of my more recent passions have been, is like the opportunity to talk about like, well, we have like potentially a piece of software that does this, but then now we're also looking at like all the things that occur, like all the people that might be involved in a process around that piece of software, and what other technologies do they integrate into, like what are the dependencies that that also are crucial to this overall flow. And it's not just like, hey, if the application doesn't do it, then we can't get this done. There's so many aspects around it. So like the idea of like service design is like the idea of mapping out that full process in and out of that system, is where we're starting to realize we can actually help maybe, map out new approaches to building products, services, and service offerings and things like that. I think that's great. And it doesn't always be like, well, you got to build technology. It's like, maybe it could be a better conversation is what you need to build, because two people aren't talking. That could be the breakdown in a process like that. So.
Makes sense. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Everybody loves talking about where their favorite tools are really useful. But what are projects and products that don't need UX work? Like, where do I not need design? Are there buckets of areas where you're like, hey, don't spend it here, it's not going to make a difference?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're doing something new and you have users, yes, I think we need there. I think there are times that I've bumped into different consultants at Improving where like, hey, tell me a little bit about the project you're working on, the product you're working on, and it's like, well, I'm building like an automation script or something. So if there could be something there, and I'm gonna stay very high level of what the heck I'm talking about on this, because that's not my place to get too deep into it. But like, to me, it feels like if there's not really a user that's taking what this effort's going to be doing, because it's like some sort of build automation and things like that. Like potentially there might not be any sort of users that you could do the research on and understand and things like that. But so maybe you don't need that. You could argue that the reason why you're doing this has some sort of deliverable and outcome that a stakeholder has, and so you could turn that question on the head and say, well, can I talk to that stakeholder and make sure that that's happening correctly for them, and then maybe back to design. But I assume there could be something out there that is very, very well defined, solves the user's specific needs every single time, and then possibly we don't need to do design, as long as you're okay with the way it works today and the way it works 20 years from now, as long as it still works. And I potentially know. So I struggle to answer the question, but yes, I guess there could be 0.01% of the time design shouldn't be involved. And then we'll go off and help design better doors and oven knobs and things like that. So
I love how hard that question was for you to answer. That was impressive to me. So on the opposite side, like if you had a blank check, what would you do? How would you approach designing new product, legacy system? Like, here it is, blank check, go spend. What do you do?
Yeah, and I think it, whether like whether it's like new or legacy is like, the approach I would love to do would be to find a way to involve and collaborate with the product team. And so to me, it's like the way that I want to work from now until whatever the end is to be collaborative with people that are building the product with you. They may have a slightly different role, a slightly different skill set, knowledge, everything like that. But I'd want to be able to build something that I could collaborate with the product team, because I would feel that would allow me to be the most successful. I'm not a silo person. I'm not let me design brilliance in the corner for 3 months and then come and deliver it as an aha moment to the team. Now you're going to build this for me and you're going to have no problems with it. So would want to involve them in a way and just basically allow everyone to be on kind of the same page. And so, being design led, using something like design thinking, building design systems and things like that, that just, gives us the best chance of like building an innovative solution.
Okay. And so if I'm the person and I'm looking at a new product and I'm like, hey, you've made some very good points. I need to go find a designer that's going to work on this product. I did some quick LinkedIn searching and wow, everything from I just graduated high school and I'm a user experience designer with no experience to 20 years and hundreds of certifications. Like, what does a good designer look like? Like, if I'm looking for one, how do I find them?
Yeah. And I love the idea that like we should look at the experience of limited to lots of experience. Like, so that would be where we'd want to look. In my mind, like, kind of going back to that blank check approach, like my consideration, good designers, one who, is collaborative, ready to work with the team, ready to kind of, help them understand the design challenge. I think so. It's a very inclusive thing. I think it's one that I think seeks to, bring others into the fact that, like, I believe everyone really is a designer. Everyone does have good ideas to be considered. And that's the scariest thing in the world is like if I'm working with a team and I'm not getting the right collaboration and all the ideas are left onto me, like what ideas are being left in people's heads for what reason? Because they didn't want to speak up or something, or they're like, no, that's not my area to talk about. And so to me, I really, I think in some ways is like, how well could they collaborate with the team to find that solution and, and be ready to hear, what the lead architect has for a potential idea, or like QA has an idea like, hey, we need to kind of make sure that we can pass this test case. Did we ever think about maybe doing it all here? That's brilliant. I never thought about that. And so like leave no good ideas on the table, not to be considered collaboration. And obviously should have an agile mindset. So we want to make sure that we're always continuously learning and adapting rapidly as we go along as well. And so, be open to where your failures are, and then what are your other options to pursue. Like now that we know we can't go there, what's the next thing we should try, and how do we learn and adapt as rapidly as possible, and allow that to be the thing, that the solution should always be informed by the latest information we got.
Fantastic. And so kind of one last thing to wrap us up. And you did get an upvote in the questions and comments section. Everything that interacts with a user needs UX. So if you wanted to leave everybody with kind of one thought, what would it be?
Yeah. So to me, I think, make design, something that you could understand. And, I think, and so that does, think about including the users that you're creating solutions for. And so the more you understand your users, I think the better tuned in to, using technology in a better way, the better tuned into building business, a more successful product. Or it doesn't have to be a money maker. It could solve the world's problems. And I think, understand the users, what their needs and problems and challenges are, and then seeing how you can make that fit into the product that you're building. And don't forget about them. Always talk to them. They're generally nice people. And they have a lot of things to say.
Awesome. And yeah. I'll say that I'm a recent design advocate convert. And luckily David and Kevin have spent some time in working through this for me, because I didn't conceptually get it. I was a deep backend software developer for too many years, and I'm like, oh, it's fine. Users, they just get in the way and enter bad data. And it took a while for me to get along. And there was a great example, and it was a conversation we were having around coffee. I don't even know if David's going to remember this. And we were talking about how Ford, Honda, and Bugatti all are car manufacturers. The difference in how they approach it, the difference in their processes, their tools, their outputs, is entirely dictated by the types of users they were going after. Right? A Bugatti Veyron is not built for the person who wants a Honda Civic. And a Honda Civic is not built for the person who wants an F-150. And so putting the primary concern of the user's needs and the problem you're solving was a huge takeaway for me. I'm like, of course, that makes sense. And then I looked at every team I'd ever been a part of, from business problems to technical solutions to the executive team at Improving, and went, who's the advocate of the user in the room? That's our designer. I don't care if they have a designer's title. The person advocating for the user and the problem holder, that's your designer.
Sure. And real quick, because first off, like the clock in the Bugatti probably costs more than the Civic and the Honda, and the other car model you'd mentioned. But the user need of the Bugatti is the buyer that did not know they needed that, but oh my God, I need that. That's the solution to their challenge, is they need to look better than the guy driving the Aston Martin or the McLaren. So
absolutely.
Well, that, David, love that conversation.
Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the time. I'm going to hand it back to Jeff. Appreciate the conversation, man.
Hey, good hanging out with you.
Yeah, thank you both.
Soon. Yeah.
Terrific, and love the analogy at the end with the cars. But thank you everyone on the call today too for attending the virtual Lunch and Learn series today. As a reminder, the recording of this session will be available the next business day on our virtual events page. And thank you everybody. Have a great weekend.
Hey, everybody, take care. Yep.